Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall in a week where we're a little bit late after the game. It's usually a quick turnaround and we had a Thursday night game. We haven't played on the weekend because of the FA Cup, but we're going to discuss, obviously, our 2-0 win over Leicester. A fantastic result and a performance that I think we were both really happy about, even if it didn't generate the most interesting game. And as it didn't generate the most interesting game, we're going to keep it not super short and sweet, but we'll do maybe a quarter, a third of the podcast on the match, and then we're going to get into a discussion about appraising the squad. Potter's had 2 months in charge, 8 games now. It's the first opportunity I think we've got to really step back and say, how do the players fit for the new manager? Does it change our thinking going into the summer? We did a lot of work in January on transfers and so on, and it was really tough because we were turning stuff around without really having a clear idea about how things would look under the new manager, basing a lot of stuff on how things had looked at previous clubs. And I think this is our first opportunity to kind of get a sense of how things look in our context at West Ham and what needs to change, who probably stays, who goes, and so on and so forth. So we'll be doing that in the second half of the podcast, but we're going to start with a game. And Cal, I think we had, despite it not being the most exciting match to watch as a football fan, I think we had quite a lot of fun, didn't we?
Yeah, I think maybe pleasingly dull is maybe the right description. I think we both wanted to. Yeah, we discussed it on the preview, didn't we? I think the priority was to try and get another clean sheet, try and not sort of stitch ourselves up by being too aggressive or progressive, and then therefore leaving the space for Leicester to hit us on the break, which we identified as being their biggest threat. And I think we did that well. There was a few openings where I think earlier in the game where they sort of Vardy had a couple of chances and was unable to convert. But from then on, I think we grew in, controlled it nicely, controlled it in sort of patches as well. It wasn't as if we were like 80% possession dominant throughout, but I think we sort of had spells where we controlled with the ball and then had spells where, because of zonal occupation, we were able to just let them have the ball without any real risk of them threatening us. So to see both sides of the coin in one game executed pretty well, considering sort of where we're at the minute, was really pleasing. Nothing to really get super excited about, and still areas where I think we can definitely improve, but steps again in the right direction.
I think given the context of our season, it's enough to get excited about. I know Leicester, obviously haven't had a very good season and been really struggling of late, and were markedly poor in this game, and particularly in the first half, and were terrible in the first half of the match. But we can't really take that angle, I don't think. I don't think it's fair to sit here and say, oh, well, Leicester aren't very good. They've really struggled this season. Therefore, the performance that we put in isn't really worth discussing, because that's the flat expectation. And that's that, because, it's not that long ago that we really struggled against them.
Yeah.
And I know we played well, again, in patches of that game. We didn't show any of the control that we showed in this one. I think from that perspective, certainly for me, as someone who's wanted to see the team move forward in that regard this season, was a main reason for change, ultimately, from David Moyes. It was, you can have questions about style and so on and so forth, but really, if we defended better last season and had better control of matches, I don't think you would have seen the change made at the end of the season, because ultimately we're still competitive in the top half for the vast majority of the season. Started the season quite well in terms of our competitiveness in the European positions. So I think, the main motivating factor for change was, regardless of if you're going to control with or without the ball, you have to have some element of control, and particularly in these games, you have to be able to control the game and not feel that you're throwing caution to the wind and potentially coming unstuck against teams that you really shouldn't come unstuck against because of the quality difference. And perhaps for the first time this season, I've watched us against a team where maybe Ipswich, the only other game, Ipswich at home, watched us against a team where we do have more quality and felt, I'm not concerned at all, and nothing in this game was going to concern me, because the team understands that ultimately what you have to do is you have to stop the opposition from doing the things they do well, and then trust in the fact that we've got more than enough quality to generate the chances that we need to win the match.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for me, one of the most pleasing things, apart from what I said a minute ago about us showing both control in possession and out of possession, which I think is really important. I think maybe when we appointed Lopetegui, it was a sort of admission or acceptance that we'd lost the control without the ball, which we used to have really well under Moyes. and then gone, okay, well, clearly the squad have lost the ability to do that, so we're going to try and just do the whole control with the ball thing, and because we'll be good at that, it won't matter so much that we're not as good without the ball. That obviously didn't transpire, and now to have seen a manager come in and sort of show both in such a short period of time is really, really pleasing. But I think something that Potter had sort of spoken about in a couple of press conferences since arriving was how we need to defend better with the ball. And I think largely that comes down to decision making. And I think throughout the season, a lot of players, but probably predominantly Paquetá and Kudus, only one of whom we saw in this game, were a bit too direct still, probably still trying to rush things, trying to get as close to goal as quickly as possible. And I think Kudus in particular in this game, and also in the Arsenal game, albeit to a lesser extent because we were more direct in that match, has shown growth in the sort of, he'll get towards the final third and now he's willing to turn around rather than just try and beat the man or get fouled or charge to the byline. On numerous occasions he stopped, put his foot on the ball, turned around, released it back to the centre backs, then we funneled it back out to the other flank, and that's going to be so integral to the whole control narrative, the way we're going to defend with the ball, because if you keep the ball you stand a lesser chance of losing the ball. And I think so often we lost the ball and then left ourselves vulnerable in transition, oftentimes because Paquetá tried a more direct pass or because Kudus tried to take on too many men in a situation that wasn't favourable. And that seems to be sort of coming out of his game, which is really going to be crucial for us as we head into the back end of the season.
Well, brings me directly on to another thing that Potter's been talking about, which is, you can have as much quality as you like in a team, you can have as much potential as you like in a team, but ultimately it's about being a team. And I think, in the Leicester game, it was a really classic example of, again, what we spoke about in the preview, where Kudus might have to, in periods of what remains of the season, not put his best individual performances in to the benefit of the team, do a different kind of job to service the team, to help the team win a match. And that's something that needs to happen across the entire squad. The squad needs to understand we have a lot of really, really talented individuals, but it's about winning games as a team. And sometimes being a team means you don't get to show your most standout qualities in every single game. Yeah, against Arsenal, we're going to be direct. We want you to go and carry the ball aggressively. We want you to get up the pitch as much as possible. We want you to win as many fouls, commit as many take-ons as possible. Against Leicester, it's not really what we're looking for. Can you give us a bit of depth? Can you pop up in the pockets? Can you link for us? And can you get in the box and maybe get on the end of something in the box? So it's about your movement and stuff like that. And yeah, it'd be great if you can, when we do get an opportunity to break, then yeah, go for it and get us up the pitch. But then, like you say, when you've made those 20, 30 yards or you've got it over the halfway line, don't need to then carry on and desperately look to create something because you've generated a transitional moment. Actually, it's a really good opportunity then to whip round, pass the ball back to Cresswell or Kilman or James Ward-Prowse or Todibo, and we can just settle on the ball and make life really, really, really difficult for them, because one of the things they massively struggled with in the game was they didn't really seem to know whether they wanted to go or not, especially when you factor what we heard in the post-match press conference from Ruud van Nistelrooy, who was really disappointed with the way his team approached the first half of the game, so that they didn't seem to want to try and win the match with or without the ball in the first half. We saw a bit more intensity in the second half out of possession. They were very vulnerable when they stepped up in the first half because it wasn't particularly well coordinated as a team. And it's something that we've spoke about again on the preview, the fact that if we could tempt a little bit of pressure from any of those front four, the two, the striker and the 10, and then the two wingers, we felt that we would have real opportunities to play round and play through. And we showed that in the game, and that comes from initially setting up really good opportunities to sort of circulate possession. That starts with players like Kudus maybe driving 20 yards up the pitch or 15 yards or even 10 yards up the pitch, turning around and helping us stop and pause and control the tempo. And these are things we've not seen the team do for a long time. I mean, really since Manuel Lanzini and Mark Noble were kind of regulars in the squad, we haven't seen the team sort of stop in that way and go, cool, we don't need to go and win this game. We don't need to over-win this game. Don't need to go and win the game 5-0 in the first 25 minutes and actually ultimately undo the game for ourselves because we start 2-0 down because we've given away two stupid transitional attacks for the opposition, which we can't defend because we don't have the best squad particularly in midfield for defending those situations. Actually, we can just kind of see through, which is what we did. I mean, the first 20 minutes of the game were dull as anything, right? Just kind of sat on the ball and didn't really do much. But it was the perfect platform to then go and win the game very comfortably from that point onwards. And I talked about midfield there, and us not having the right profiles to be able to go and attack the game in that way from the start. And I think this three, it's funny, isn't it? You go kind of on a long journey through all these many different combinations and ways of bringing the midfield together. You go through all these different ideas, and then here we are in the first few days of March. Edson Alvarez, Tomas Soucek, and James Ward-Prowse. It works a lot better than anything else we've seen this season, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And we spoke a lot. It might have been on the previous breakdown, and certainly on the preview, about the need to sort of have all three of them to create a midfield that's at least worthy of the sum of its parts, if not greater than. And yeah, it worked again. It is funny that it's 2025 and this is where we're at, because we've long yearned rather for a progressive midfielder in there. And I think you probably, if you were
two of us banging on about Łukasz Paquetá could play as an 8 years ago, right? And
hey, he still could somewhere, I'm sure of it. We weren't wrong. I won't fall on my sword on that one. But yeah, I think the blend of profiles, Soucek obviously is the box crasher, Ward-Prowse is the sort of retention specialist, and Alvarez as the ball winner predominantly, a jeweler, but also I think increasingly a carrying presence as well, which I think is a real bonus for us in terms of the way that Potter wants to play, just to have that option, not to like depend on it as such, but having a midfielder in there that if he sees the space ahead of him isn't afraid to carry into it, in the same way that the likes of Max Kilman and Jean-Claire Todibo are in the centre-back areas. Having those profiles that can just push us forward and take that initiative is incredibly helpful. So yeah, seeing it play out was great. And I think, yeah, what you touched on about sort of the team playing as a team in possession, I think is really interesting, and again, another really promising thing that we've seen from this, because I think we've arrived at a point where previously we played as a team, and I'm speaking about under Moyes less so than Lopetegui, but we were very much played as a team defensively, and then I think when we attacked, there was an element of, okay, Kudus, Antonio, Bowen, Paquetá, the sort of attack functions around you, and everyone else facilitates you guys to go and do the stuff up in the final third. But it was sort of a defence-first approach, which made sense under Moyes because we were very, very good at it and we had those star players. And I think now we're arriving at a point where someone like Max Kilman is as influential in how we play in attack as the striker is, because of how much control we want to assert. Whereas previously the role of someone like Cresswell or players in those deeper areas was to clip balls into Antonio and then let the attack do the rest, and the back four would stay back and stabilise against transitions. And I think that's a really nice place for us to arrive at so soon, and seeing all these players take on those responsibilities, like Alvarez in the carrying, like Ward-Prowse constantly getting his arms out saying, give me the ball, even if he's just going to bounce it back to the player he's received it from. Everyone's sort of taken on that joint responsibility in how we move the ball towards the final third is really promising. And like you say, I think to be able to still be having conversations about the utility that all three of those midfielders offer to this team is funny, but also really pleasing and testament to Potter, I think, ultimately, because I think a few months ago we probably would have been looking at some of these players going, oh no, their West Ham career is over, they're not as good as they once were, or I don't know what they can offer to this squad anymore, or they're not of the required level. And I think since he's come in, all three of those players in one game or another, or in some cases more than one game, of course, have shown that absolutely they are Premier League level footballers, and if played to their strengths in the right system, there is a future for them, either at West Ham or certainly at this level.
Yeah, I feel quite pleased about that, because I've been banging on about that for ages, haven't I? That these guys are all actually quite good footballers.
Soucek is inevitable.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when we talk about the sort of attacking as a team and in that way, and understanding how to kind of control the match as a team when we have the ball, I think qualities that previously could have even been considered problematic for the team, right? If we looked at Ward-Prowse as a sort of the deepest midfielder for us a year ago, in a game like this, we probably would have been talking about a lack of progression, a huge number of touches, but a lack of ultimate incisiveness and incision, the ability to break two lines or the ability to go and carry past someone at the base of midfield. And whilst that remains, true to some extent, there isn't a huge amount of progression that comes out of him. He's not Bruno Guimaraes. He's not going to offer those kind of qualities as the deepest midfielder. I think now that there's perhaps less of a kind of a focus on what the individual can do in any given moment in that back line to create an opening, some space for someone like Mikel Antonio or Bowen or Kudus or Paquetá to receive. And actually, we're quite happy to attack the game and play the game very differently in possession. Those qualities now become kind of invaluable to the team and to the squad as it's constructed, because I do want to single him out. We usually talk about individual performances mostly on extra time, and we will be doing that. Patreon.com/Analytics United if you want to hear us talk about all of the players in this game. There are two players I want to talk about. The first one is Ward-Prowse, and the second one is Cresswell on the main show. And I think really the two for the same reasons, slightly different. Ward-Prowse, like I say, qualities that previously we might not have looked at as quite so impressive under Potter when we're playing games in this way. Absolutely so important to the team. Understands so well how to keep things ticking, how to keep the ball moving, how to make it difficult for Leicester, how to keep Leicester moving side to side, running about, chasing things, never getting close, and to keep us in possession very comfortably. And then taking risks only at the moment where it's very clear that there's an opportunity to break aggressively into dangerous space. And then Cresswell, really, for the ability to just, you made me laugh, and I think you made a couple of the cameramen laugh in the press room. We come into the post-match press conference because we were waiting for the managers to come out, and I said, "Oh look, Cresswell's played. What was it? 30 odd more passes, completed 30 odd more passes than any other player on the pitch. He's attempted 40 more than any other player on the pitch." And you did a Scouse impression of what it's like watching him on the football pitch, what it must be like playing next to him. But yes, he doesn't half demand the ball, does he?
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see, and I think he could have ended the game with even more passes, really, if he'd have got the ball as often as he was demanding it, particularly off the keeper. I think I'm going to play tennis with you now and say Jack made me laugh. Sitting next to Jack in the stands watching the game, it's great when the goalkeeper receives the ball. Literally, whatever centre back is around him. Now you drop. Come out wide. Drop to receive. And the amount of times Cresswell was doing that, just dropping almost to the byline where you would expect the ball to go out for a throw if there wasn't someone there and it was passed there. And it just seemed, at least from Jack's reactions, that Cresswell was doing it right 9 times out of 10 by just dropping and offering that outlet, which I think is especially important when you've got Areola in goal and you're trying to limit his sort of frequency of going long, because obviously the long distribution isn't a strength, but also not something that we want to look to do really in this system anyway.
Easy in this game because the amount of times that Vardy did a kind of like, I'm leaning and I've already started running backwards.
But yeah, I think that's really useful for just you basically need your centre backs, or he was a centre back in this game obviously, but just defenders in general, to make the goalkeeper's life as easy as possible. And that is sort of done by making sure that you are in as much space as possible and that the passing angle is as easy as possible. And I think Cresswell excels at that. At times it can probably look a bit weird because he's like, why are you going so far away from the play? But obviously that then spreads the pitch, then it shuffles the opposition around, and then someone blessed with Cresswell's left foot can then be in a very good position to exploit that and help us play through and go from there. So yeah, I think you're right to highlight both of them, and particularly in combination, I would say, because both of them are two players that want to be on the ball. They're both sort of senior heads in this team, in this dressing room, and particularly sort of as we look to bring the age profile of the squad down as well, they will continue to be two of the more senior players on the pitch. So I think, really, really pleasing to see them both come in and lead by example, but not just from like a sort of classic vocal leader, but also just leading by example through performance, by sort of exemplifying how you're meant to sort of play in this system. And then Cresswell, I think, as well, being alongside Scarles, who's obviously so early in his career. You see it on the pitch, the way he's sort of giving advice to Scarles, even in terms of like body position. There was one moment where I saw Cresswell talking to Scarles and he was just showing like, open your body up, like turning out, and then you see Scarles receive the ball in a few minutes time and does exactly that, and then is able to carry into the opposition half. So yeah, I think that sort of guidance on the pitch is really good, but obviously massive bonus that they're both huge upsides for us in possession at the moment.
Yes, I did enjoy you talking about him demanding possession when the pass is impossible for Todibo. He's got to pass it through about 3 people and still have Cresswell with his arms in the air screaming, I'm open, I'm open, give me the ball. I think dovetailing, you mentioned it between the two of them. I think Ward-Prowse for control and then Cresswell for the incision. The fact that Cresswell will try things. I didn't, at the end of the first half, I wasn't loving it. It did go a bit more easy towards the last sort of 10 minutes of the first half, where it was like every time he got the ball, one touch out of his feet and whipped into the channel. Is there anyone there? What? Don't know. But for the most part, really, really important to kind of bring his qualities in to actually just see lots of the ball, be very comfortable having lots of the ball, but also be someone that can really be incisive with their passing from deep, and someone that's been underappreciated as a West Ham player for such a long time. I mean, remember him playing at left back for years, and people talking about him not being good enough defensively, and it was fair enough maybe towards the end to have complaints about him as a defensive fullback, but we never spoke enough about just how unbelievably good he was at progressing play for us down that side of the pitch. I mean, with those balls often, always laser accurate, whips a ball into Mikel Antonio from left back, breaks 2 lines for you, gets you up the pitch. Absolutely fantastic player for that, and really helped in this game with a different kind of performance. Last thing I want to mention with Ward-Prowse as well, reaction to turnover. Oh my God. Wow. Wow, what a performance. From all of the issues that we had in that first game, where every time Leicester won the ball on the edge of their box, it was, one pass out, El Khanous turns or one or not turns and they're away. Didn't happen once. And the reason it didn't happen once is because every time someone tried to turn, Ward-Prowse was there, nicked the ball. I think it was 4 high turnovers as an individual on the pitch in terms of him just winning tackles in the final third as the deepest midfielder. Super impressive alone. But then I, could count probably another 4 to 5 successful pressures where he's gone out and forced the ball long, which then Kilman's gone and won a header, and we've retained possession off the back of it. Those qualities are so important to our midfield, and I just thought his on an individual level. Final note on him. Probably for me, one of the top 3 most impressive individual performances of the season from any West Ham player. And I know that's really going some for a game that was very boring, but with what we've lacked in midfield, I mean, he just filled the entire hole that's been there. He just filled out that whole space in one game. It was an absolutely brilliant performance. Yeah.
I mean, there's not much else to say other than just to echo that. I think if we're judging it purely on application in the context of the system and sort of the instructions that he will have been given, someone who is so tidy in possession and also so good at penning the opposition in, 2 things that you absolutely need to thrive in a Potter system, it's hard to disagree, really. I thought he was fantastic, and the counter-pressing stuff is something that we sort of highlighted when he was brought back from loan as being a potential huge upside for us, because we didn't really have someone who was quite so good as him at it. We had people that were willing to press, but maybe not the best pressers, and some people who were good pressers but didn't have the legs to actually cover the amount of ground that he does. And I think the fact that he brings both to that midfield, particularly when you put it alongside Soucek, who is probably the one that doesn't quite have the legs to arrive quickly enough but is good in those duels, and Alvarez, who is good in the duels but probably arrives a little bit too aggressively sometimes, it brings such a nice balance and sort of ties it all together. And I think there were moments where you saw, on occasion, sometimes all 3 of them, but certainly 2 of them, depending on what side of the pitch it was, sort of swarming to go to the player together. And again, probably a nice note to end on, is that sort of collective spirit in the team, that they're clearly all understanding that this is a team effort. If I go, we all need to go. And if we all go, it will work. Again, to see that so early on, and again with sort of new shapes and new combinations of players on the pitch for the first time together, still building these relationships. Some of these players on the pitch haven't even played with Ward-Prowse before the last few weeks. So to see us sort of building those relationships already, super exciting.
Well, I couldn't bait Potter into speaking about Ward-Prowse, but I think you summed it up very nicely at the end there. He only wants to talk about the team. Desperately wanted to talk about Ward-Prowse as an individual. I'm glad that we can at least do that here. Look, to wrap up the game, the key difference really between the two matches, and they're so different in terms of the way that they played out. The 3-1 loss at their place, and then the 2-0 win at our place. 31 shots in that first game, 3.1 xG, an average chance quality of 0.1. I mean, that sounds quite good on paper, especially when you consider to the game that we won, just the 8 shots, 1.33 xG. But the key difference, the most important difference, is the average chance quality there of 0.17, and that's 0.04 above the top ranked team in the Premier League right now, Brentford, for non-penalty xG per shot. I think it's really clear to see now with this West Ham squad and the two different sides that we've shown in the two most recent games against Arsenal and against Leicester, control without, control with, that whichever way you play, however you set up, whatever formation you play, however you press, whatever you do, the most important thing for this group, which again backed up by the data that I posted post-match on Twitter, which says we've only lost once this season with this condition. When you generate the better quality chances, not necessarily more chances, but when you generate the better quality chances, we don't lose games. And fantastic to see a manager understand that and to play to that particular squad strength, that we have an ability to generate big chances in the group because we have some pretty special individual players that can help us to do that. And we have players that convert incredibly reliably off of those very big chances. And as long as we can limit chance quality for the opposition, it's very difficult for them to score against us, particularly with the defenders that we have and the goalkeepers. Yep. Max Kilman we didn't speak about. We'll talk about him on extra time. It was not his best performance, probably one of his weaker performances of the season, but still the number of headers out of the box, the number of brilliant positions to make interventions, clearances inside the box, very difficult. If we defend in that way against teams, for them to be able to win matches. And that helps us to go on to an appraisal of the squad, which I know is exactly your kind of thing. It's your bag.
Correct.
So we're going to go through the group. Like I said at the top of the podcast, it's been 2 months, 8 games for Potter. It's probably still a little bit early, but we're towards the back end of the season and it's about the right time to look at this. We will, of course, look at it again in the summer, but it's time to go through the group to talk about all the players and where we think they fit in terms of the long-term plans. And we'll start in goal, where there's been quite a big change, and not one that we've really spoken about all that much. Alphonse Areola coming in as first choice again over Łukasz Fabiański, which is a bit of a surprise to me because Łukasz Fabiański, in the data, ranks really well this season, has done really well in terms of goals prevented. And then Alphonse Areola's probably had possibly his worst individual season this season in terms of those really important metrics. How many shots are you letting in that you shouldn't let in? He's been right down the bottom for most of the season so far. We will start with Areola, 32 now, contract running to 2027. First team, bench.
Yeah, it's difficult really, isn't it? Because I think the answer to this is it's probably better to discuss in the round, because I think ultimately where I'm at is that for this system to really, really thrive, I would be looking at bringing in a new goalkeeper that is just nailed on, ball comfortable. I think there's hope, and I get it. There's hope, I think, from Potter and Xavi Villarro in the goalkeeping coach role, that Areola maybe could turn this corner and go back to being the sort of one of the better keepers outside of the top 6, which he has been previously. And I get that, and it's very Potter, right, to come back in and sort of give someone a new lease of life and try and put that confidence in them. And I think he has slightly improved since Potter's arrived, but still is way off the standards. And therefore, I'm looking at it thinking, if I'm bringing in a goalkeeper to improve sort of the system, and that's going to be my starter, and we've got Fodringham, who's going to be the reserve goalkeeper anyway, because he's still not here for another year, it's then between Areola and Fabiański as the backup. And I'm thinking, Fabianski's got no value to anyone apart from us, really. We have the option to extend that by a year. Areola, maybe you could get a fee for 32, decent, good pedigree, probably good in the right system, not this system. So therefore, if I can get something for him while he still has some value, that probably makes more sense than having him as the backup. when Fabiański has shown that he's more than serviceable as a deputy, another one of those leaders in the dressing room. So I think that's probably where I'm at, but it is kind of difficult because it depends on whether or not you can shift Areola. If you know going into the summer there's absolutely no market for Areola whatsoever, I think you probably let Fabiański go and you just try and upgrade that position. But I think if you can find someone that wants Areola, then you probably entertain his departure.
Yeah, I think perfect system you should clarify, and we can say that I'm sure what you mean is a team that maybe sits behind the ball and maybe invites more shots from range and stuff. Very good reaction, reflex, kind of keeper, makes saves for those kinds of teams. If you're going to let in lots of big chances, 1v1s, and chances where players are running in behind, you need the keeper maybe to be a bit more confident stepping off his line and sweeping and stuff like that. Possibly not so much Areola's game, and I'm not sure it's too many keepers' game, to be honest. You don't want to be letting in, which team wants to to let in chances like that. But yeah, obviously some teams, and particularly bigger teams, maybe accept that when they are going to concede chances, probably are going to be on counters, and therefore, yeah, you need a keeper who's really good in those situations. Perhaps Areola not quite right for that kind of team. The problem is, and like you say, is finding a buyer. I think he's a player on quite high wages. Like you say, he's got good pedigree, so I imagine will have always had a decent wage where he's been from PSG onwards. So it might be quite difficult, especially given the fact that he's contracted to 2027. He's got an option for a further year beyond that as well to 2028. So it's a difficult one, because I agree with you. I think you probably do want to put another keeper in the goalkeeping department, because we haven't been great there this season. But difficult to find out how you create the kind of value in the spare value in the squad is, I suppose, what I'm trying to say, to be able to do that. Because if you're forced to keep Areola and you say, right, well, we'll let Fabiański go and bring another goalkeeper in, you probably don't want to bring another goalkeeper on massive wages, because when are you going to be able to let go of Areola, right? So it's a challenging one, but in theory I definitely agree with you, and it's probably one of the simplest positions to kind of work out what you'd like to do on paper. Centre back is a lot more difficult, I think. To figure out. There are lots of players to discuss here. I think we both know how we feel about Kilman. I know there's been a lot of criticism of him across the fan base, across the whole season, really, and people have spoken about entertaining bids if people come in with decent bids, that we should be interested in selling Kilman. I think Kilman is probably one of the most impressive players in the squad, has had one of the best individual seasons across the squad. I think naturally what happens in these situations when a player is signed for a lot of money, there's a lot more pressure. And there's a lot more focus on the mistakes that they do make, and perhaps not enough focus on the things that they do really well for the team. And because defence hasn't been one of the things that's gone well this season for the team, you pick out the player that was signed for the most amount of money in that area and think that they're going wrong. So completely understandable, but I think we both feel that, contracted to 2031 should be a starter for West Ham for a long while yet. But it's behind that things get a little bit more challenging. You've got Jean-Claire Todibo coming in, obviously making his loan deal permanent in the summer. You've got Konstantinos Mavropanos still contracted to 2028. You've got Kaelan Casey coming through behind that, contract to 2027. And then you have Nayef Aguerd out on loan. His contract with West Ham runs to 2027. And then you've also got, I guess, Aaron Cresswell, who we can probably count now as more of a wide centre-back than a left-back. 35 years old, out of contract in the summer. And I will let you start where you please with that, kind of working out who would be your starters to begin with, and then who you most want to be in the squad.
Yeah, well, the starters definitely Kilman and Todibo. I think whether you play a four-back with two centre-backs or a three-back with three centre-backs, they're both going to be in that somewhere. I think Cresswell is an interesting one because obviously his contract expires in the summer. And I think if you'd have asked me this about 2 months ago, I probably would have just said that his time's up and it makes sense to let him go. However, and I know it's small sample size, but I just really think based on what we've seen from Potter so far, he's more than capable of doing another year as a backup sort of rotation option who can come in and cover more so as a sort of wide centre back than a full back. But still, if you were really suffering with an injury crisis, you could put him in at left back and just sort of turn that into a 3-back anyway by pushing the right back on and tucking him inside. So I think I'd probably just give him another year. Also, for all the stuff we've talked about in this episode, just as being a leader, being a good sort of mentor for someone like Ollie Scarles, being one of those older heads in the dressing room alongside the likes of Fabiański, alongside the likes of Ward-Prowse. I think when you're looking at the squad and the sort of work we've got to do, I think we've seen what can happen when you let a load of those figures leave and don't really replace them. So I think there's something to be said for just keeping them around almost for that. Obviously, if they're a complete negative in possession and out of possession, then you just let them go. But I don't think he is that. So I'd be keeping Cresswell around. Mavropanos is an interesting one. I think we're probably going to be divided on this. I think he's been better than a lot of people give him credit for this season, but I still think he's unreliable enough to not want him to be too involved personally, particularly if you're gonna sort of play this sort of style where control is paramount. So I'd be willing to listen to offers. However, I think he's more than good enough to be a backup squad member at this level. But I also think for the right team and the right league, there probably is a fee that you could command north of 15 to 20 million, and if that offer comes in, you probably take it and reinvest it in the squad. Casey, I'd probably look to send out on loan depending on how many centre-backs we have in the squad. I think regular first-team minutes are probably what he needs now. And then Nayef Aguerd is the one I probably want to land on, because based on the form that he's been showing in La Liga and sort of what you think his strengths are, I can see him being a really good addition to a back line of Todibo, Kilman in that sort of more cover, passive, central centre-back role that just nods things out of the box. And then Aguerd doing all the stuff that Todibo's doing on that right-hand side. Super progressive, really good recovery pace. And also
in Cresswell's position, right?
Yes, yeah. So Cresswell would be the deputy to him, really, in that system, if we play with 3 centre-backs. But also, I think, as we've seen with Potter, the systems are fluid anyway. So even if you're lining up in a back 4, you could probably put Aguerd at left back, knowing that he's going to tuck inside and be a left centre-back in possession anyway. So yeah, I think I would hope to keep him around in the summer, bring him back, see what he can do in pre-season. Obviously, that's all dependent on whether he actually wants to come back or not. He might have decided that he really enjoys Spain, and if an offer comes in and Real Sociedad want to keep him, then you probably have that discussion, and then you're looking at maybe going out and buying a new centre-back. But from what I can see, all of his strengths make so much sense in this Graham Potter system, so I'd really be keen to bring him back. And also, he's gone back to looking like a serious goal threat from set pieces since going on loan. So I think when you're talking about a system that wants to rely on just creating a few high quality chances, and James Ward-Prowse might be in the starting 11 next season, then having another centre back who's capable of nodding in corners and free kicks is only a bonus.
Yeah, I think interesting points on all of them. I think Todibo and Kilman, there's not really much conversation that needs to happen beyond what you've said there. Casey, I think it's probably fair enough. Mavropanos, I think, is an interesting one. Again, kind of like you said, I think if an offer comes in at the right level, then I think I'd be interested. But I wouldn't really actively be looking to sell Mavropanos, because he can play as the central centre-back, he can play as a right centre-back, he can play as a right-back as well. Yep. So I just think in terms of like utility, number of positions he can cover, contract to 2028, not as a starter, but as someone that if you get injuries can come in lots of different spots and do a job. I would probably be interested in keeping him around. I also think he's one of those where he has so much of the kind of raw ability to go and be a top level centre back that kind of like he ends up in the sort of perennial Issa Diop spot where it's like it could happen any day.
Now, got to hold on to you just in case it bangs at some point.
Yeah, it's like you don't know, right? So you get into this sort of spot where it's like, well, it's not happened yet, but we can hang on, and maybe one day he'll just turn that corner and it will all come together for him. And you want to be the team that has him when that happens, because if he did turn that corner and cut a bunch of mistakes out of his game, he would be kind of dynamite. He would be unbelievable. Because, often with Mavro, you have lots of games this season where he will give you an 8 out of 10 level or above for 75 to 80 minutes of the game. and then for 10 to 15 minutes you're looking at a 2 or a 3, and that it's that problem that he needs to sort of figure out and work his way through and get past ultimately if he wants to be a reliable number one player for a team with the kind of ambition that West Ham have in the Premier League. But I do love that he can fit into a lot of different gaps. And if you needed someone to do kind of what Cresswell does at coming in from left back on that side, you could probably do that on the other side if you needed him to, if you wanted to shift the whole thing across one. The interesting thing that I think also comes up with him, as compared to Nayef Aguerd, I think Mavro does have the qualities that you want in a wide centre-back out of possession, much more so, because he's really aggressive. Yeah. So I think, obviously, this hinges on his ability to cover if he gets it wrong and race back. And he's probably got it wrong too much this season. But whoever does that kind of job for the team needs to be comfortable stepping out aggressively. And I think that's where we've seen things maybe go slightly wrong for Kilman at times this season, is when he's forced to kind of be super aggressive, stepping out of the back line. It can all get a bit hairy because his timing isn't perfect. He's much better as a sort of more passive centre-back. And Nayef Aguerd, interestingly, in La Liga this season, is in the 82nd percentile for tackles. So he's making a huge number of tackles. The one thing that probably you would like to see come up a little bit to fulfill that kind of role is only 21st percentile for interceptions. And that is something that, Cresswell's actually done quite well since coming into the team in that role. He's been happy to push out really aggressively and try and nick the ball, often perhaps not retaining possession himself, but jumping out as a pass is being made and then sort of poking his foot between the legs of the player that's trying to receive it to see if he can sort of divert possession away for one of the midfielders to get onto, which is what led to the goal at Arsenal, right? He kind of stepped out of the defence, won a tackle on the edge of the box and created a counter-attack for us. So these are qualities that you want, someone who's comfortable doing that. So I think Mavro has that stands him in good stead for that kind of role in the squad, and be interesting to see how Nayef Aguerd would figure in that kind of role long time going forward. Briefly, can you give us a quick run through on the fullbacks then, because we've got Emerson and Scarles at left back and Wan-Bissaka and Coufal at right back. Emerson contract 2026, Scarles to 2028, Wan-Bissaka 2031, and Coufal out of contract in the summer.
Yeah, I think Coufal is a tricky one. But I think it's so difficult, isn't it? Because he really is a legend, and I don't want to badmouth him, but I just don't know what his utility is necessarily moving forward. I don't think he's a wing-back in the way that we've seen Wan-Bissaka capable of doing. I just don't think he's comfortable enough in possession. And I don't think he can do the right-sided centre-back thing in the way that Cresswell has sort of been able to develop into in his later career. So I think, unlike for Cresswell, I don't think there's sort of that pathway as he sort of gets older. And I think also, completely fairly for Coufal, I think there is probably a level and a team where he could go and still be a starting right back, whereas I think Cresswell probably looks at it and goes, well, I probably don't have many top flight clubs that want me to start for them at left back, so I'm happy to stick around and be a squad member and a leader. So I think, as much as it pains me to say it, I'll probably let Coufal go. Wan-Bissaka obviously stays as the starting wing back. Scarles stays around as a squad player, and I think this is a difficult one for me, whereas I think Emerson probably falls into that Areola category for me, where if I can find somewhere to move him on, I probably would, because I want Scarles to be definitely involved. But I also think, and for a long time we've thought we needed to do this, I think we still need to bring in a much higher quality sort of left wing back who's sort of bona fide starter in the way that Wan-Bissaka is on the right hand side. I think maybe some fans will be disappointed to hear that, because Scarles has been fantastic, but I don't know if I'm necessarily comfortable heading into next season where Scarles is your out and out starter, because I don't think he's shown yet that he can start as a left fullback in a back four system when we want to play that. And then I think if you don't have that person, you're kind of stitching yourself up. And I also don't think Emerson is of the level that I need that person to be, if that makes sense. So basically,
I think the issue is that if you stuck with Scarles and Emerson, and Scarles did have a rough patch, as you expect young players to have at some point, it's not all going to be very unlikely that it's going to be complete plain sailing, right? Even Declan Rice had periods where he struggled right at the start, had games where it didn't go well, and you needed someone who could come in and push and maintain the level and also help pull the young player with them, right? And and keep that level really high, set that standard. I think Emerson. We'll see what happens in the remainder of the season. It's a big challenge now laid down to Emerson for what remains of the season to really prove that. I don't think he's done a brilliant job of proving that in the first half of this season. He kind of sat in the position, putting in some very sort of average 6 out of 10.
Really, because he knew there wasn't any pressure from behind until Scarles arrived.
Well, reluctant always to suggest that player is coasting, but it's the closest anyone's looked to that for a little while at West Ham to me. Not particularly aggressive to jump out, not particularly high intensity in attack or defence, a little bit kind of...
Yeah, I'm not saying that he's coasting necessarily. I think contextually that's just the position he's in, right? Because there was no other... Yeah.
Yes, and I think you need that. You need that. And we saw that when he came on against Leicester. We saw this sudden burst of like, right, let's go. Trying to make dribbles, trying to jump out and make interceptions because he wants to prove that he's of the level to be the starting fullback. And we need that competition. Look forward to seeing what he does with that challenge with what remains of the season. But yeah, there would definitely be an argument to bring someone else in who can at least really pull that level up next season and bring Scarles with them. Yeah. There's no suggestion that Scarles doesn't meet that challenge and challenge consistently across the season and maybe win the spot over whoever comes in. But you need to keep the challenge really, really strong in that spot next year. We're going to take a break there, and then I think we're almost out of time. So what we'll do is we will discuss a handful of other key players, and then we will adjourn the rest to another podcast later in the season. Typical us, we've run out of time. So I wanted to do defensive midfielders, and there's a few to talk about. I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts in that area, because obviously that's an area we've talked about a lot where we think work needs to be done. But I'm going to highlight a few players for us to tack on at the end here. You mentioned Ward-Prowse a couple of times already. We've talked about him a lot in the start of the podcast about the Leicester match. It's him and Soler that I want to talk about next. Soler on loan and could be someone that we go in for in the summer. And Ward-Prowse obviously just back from loan, contracted to 2027. We spent a lot of money on him, and we kind of have to figure out whether we're going to build with him in mind for as a starter or as a player that's pushing for a starting position, or whether we're going to move away from having him as kind of one of the starting players. So I'm interested really in your thoughts on those two players, whether you'd be pushing for Soler on a permanent, and whether you would be kind of having Ward-Prowse central to your plans going forward. It seems quite early to be doing that because it's only been a couple of games under Potter, but he's probably done enough to really shake up the thinking.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'll kick off with Soler because I think it's an easy one for me, really, because going into the summer, presumably budget is going to be somewhat limited. I hope that from the sort of things we've been heard reporting, they've been impressed with Potter, they want to back him, but we're not going to have copious amounts of money to spend, and therefore drop in whatever we would need to pay PSG for Carlos Soler, who I think isn't a nailed-on starter, whatever way you look at it. And therefore, if I'm thinking of him as a squad player that's sort of pushing for the starting 11, then I want that squad player to be 21 to 23, so that when he does break in, he's then got runway, rather than breaking in at 29, 30 and there's not huge amounts of value. Or
an older player who's not on a massive,
exactly,
wage,
isn't
right?
coming from PSG on however many hundreds of thousands he's probably on.
Yeah.
So... yeah, I think for that reason, I probably do let him go. I think there's definitely a player in there, and I think at times he's looked bright, and I think he could do a lot of the ball retention, counter-pressing stuff with a bit of goal threat around the box as well, but I don't think we've seen enough of it, and I don't think he would be, as I say, a starter for me. Ward-Prowse, I think, yeah, as you say, he's not been here long since Potter arrived, but what we have seen is someone who can offer a lot to this system. And for that reason, I think, yeah, he's a first-team option. Whether he's on the first 11, I don't think that is necessarily important. Is he in the first 15 players that you think of when you're thinking who's going to start this week? Absolutely. And I think if you bring in someone in Soler's spot who's younger, maybe slightly more progressive, slightly more pacey, a carrier that can challenge Ward-Prowse or can rotate depending on who we're playing, what sort of approach we're going to take. Perfect. But I think there's absolutely a spot for Ward-Prowse, because I think for all the reasons we've discussed in this pod, we don't need to go into it in depth here. But yeah, it just makes sense to keep him around, I'd say.
I think they both fit into the same sort of slot in the squad, don't they? When you think about the squad, you want someone who can retain the ball really well, and you want someone who can operate really well as a counter presser. And they both do those two things. They do them slightly differently. One as the sort of set piece upside, and one you probably think of more as someone who definitely previous in their career has been really good as kind of a pick out spaces in the box, arrive in good spots and finish chances. We haven't seen that so much this season. I think that's the thing that goes against the idea of keeping Soler on a permanent. If he'd gone and scored 5-6 goals this season, it would be a different conversation. And I think the point that you make about maybe bringing someone younger in who can do the kind of stuff that he is meant to do, who maybe doesn't cost quite as much as he would, then that makes a lot of sense and keeps the pressure on Ward-Prowse. And you have two slightly different options. I think Ward-Prowse, someone that you'd probably be more comfortable playing as the deepest guy, and then you want the other one to be someone who you could probably play as the most advanced player in the three for different kinds of games, when you want those different qualities in different areas of the pitch. The last two to move on to, and of course we're going to discuss them. We'd be mad not to. It's Łukasz Paquetá and Mohammed Kudus. I think things have changed quite a lot, haven't they? Yeah. Under the new manager, we have a different idea really of what we are looking for in the slots that these players play in, and how we have to construct the squad. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting discussions that we'll run, and of course we'll come back to in different podcasts. What do you do with these two?
Oh, it's so difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult because I love both of them, but I think ultimately, if we're being completely objective, I think both of them have issues in this system. I think Kudus has shown that he's good enough to be a part of any system, and has also shown improvement within the system. So I think there's certainly a space for him. He's also probably our most valuable player. So I think depending on if offers come in and how much those offers are, and factoring in that he isn't the perfect person for this system, I don't think, because I think he is more suited to being sort of a direct transitional threat, then I think...
Funny that. Sorry.
I think there's, as there should be for a club of our size, if that sort of money is put on the table, you have to entertain it, because I think the amount of work that you can do to the squad, taking it towards its final version, is really sort of important. I also just think
love this idea. You're always building towards the final version.
But
one day we'll get there.
Yeah,
it's like that meme of the guy with the pickaxe, you know.
Yeah, we're so close. But I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is that I don't, when you view them in the whole, and I think it's good that we're talking about both of them in the same point, is that I find it very difficult, and we do a lot of this, particularly the two of us in chats with each other, sending each other versions of different 11s and go, oh, I think I've cracked it. I think this is how we line up with the current squad. I find it really difficult to find a squad that I'm happy with where both of them exist in the same starting 11, because I think one of them ends up playing out of position, really, unless you play Bowen up front, and then I'm like, well, I don't want him up front. I'd rather him in that right wing slot. And then it's Kudus out on the left wing, and then I'm going, oh, well, where's Paquetá going? And also, I don't really like Kudus as a left winger. So yeah, it's really difficult. I think ultimately I'd probably let one of them go, if I'm being completely honest. If I had to, and
you know who it has to be, don't you? You know who it has to be, because one has no value right now because there's a ban hanging over.
Exactly. I think, and I also think that probably makes more sense, because I think Jarrod Bowen right wing, Łukasz Paquetá left wing as a sort of wing fielder with a new striker makes a lot more sense than Jarrod Bowen right wing, Mohammed Kudus left wing and a new striker, or Jarrod Bowen striker, Kudus left wing and a new left winger. I think if you're going to let one of them go, then I think the best place to end up in is £85 million in the bank with Paquetá left wing and Bowen right wing, than whatever you can get, if anything, for Paquetá and Kudus playing out.
Well, if you want 85 million, you're going to have to sort of work out a really special system that's just entirely designed to get Mohammed Kudus scoring about 10 goals in what remains of the season.
I'll take 65, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult because he is obviously such a good player. I just think you can probably find someone who maybe looks better in the Graham Potter system than Kudus does for half the money, and then go and buy the other upgrades with the money that you've made.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It's really tough.
Also, is this not why we bought Kudus in, really? We bought him from Ajax because we were able to buy him for way less than what he could be worth.
Yep.
And now if we can go and find the money, then that's when we should do it. Because if we miss that window, which kind of where we're at now, right? Like, I wasn't advocating for selling him last summer, but that's when his value was highest and there was clubs sniffing around for whatever. And then he's been a shadow of the version of last season's Kudus, and his value's gone down, and now there's not as many conversations, and you're kind of looking around going, oh, well, where do we sell him to get that money? So I think it's one of them where if one of those golden ticket offers comes in north of 60 mil, you probably do have to have that conversation of, is it better for us to go and buy 2 or 3 players that massively improve this system with the money and just let Kudus go, than it is to hold on to Kudus in the hope that eventually he shines to an extent that we can go and sell him for even more? Because I think, as you've rightly identified, this system isn't one that's going to make him look like an £85 million player.
My only issue with that is I think that tunnels a little bit too much into the idea that Potter will always play the exact way that he would play in a perfect contextless world. And I think what we have seen is that Potter's an incredibly adaptable manager, and he will work with the players at his disposal, and he'll find a way to get the best outcomes for those players. That might not always mean the best outcomes for the individuals within the team, but it will always be focused on trying to generate the best outcomes for the team. Mm-hmm. The issue is that when you sign a player to ideally flip them for a lot of money, which I think was part really of the plan with signing Mohammed Kudus. If you're not taking specifically to getting that individual to look brilliant, it becomes harder to make the kind of cash that you were hoping to make. And ultimately, there's a really good example of this recently in West Ham's history. We suffered as a team to allow Rice to go and prove that he could be a box-to-box midfielder, so we could make a lot more money off of Declan Rice than we might have otherwise done if he hadn't been given that opportunity to go and prove that. I mean, I don't think Arsenal would have spent the kind of money that they did on him to then slot him in as an 8 most of the time if he hadn't had that season of evidence that I can go and offer a lot of value as a kind of carrier. Perhaps not for this team, but for another team, you can kind of see what he's done there and see how it might map into your team. And that helped us make a big return on him. But it really negatively affected, I would say, a season at West Ham and what we might have been able to get out of that season in the Premier League, because I think the balance of our team wasn't right as it previously had been when Soucek was released to go forward and Rice was held back. And yeah, it's difficult sometimes to make these decisions about how you balance things. And I think it's easier when you're in a very comfortable position and things are going well to take that kind of decision and to focus on getting the best out of an individual. And we just haven't given ourselves that platform this season. And that makes things much more challenging than they would otherwise be. I can see us in a situation where we don't get that kind of offer next season. And then I think it's about finding the right balance next season between those two things. And that might not always mean that all 3 of them start. And that is a difficult situation to manage within the squad, because I think all 3 want to be the most important player in the team. And I think arguably 2 of them, I think 2 of them probably need to feel like they're the most important player in the team to be their best, which I think is challenging.
Especially when one of them isn't Jared Bowen and he's going to start every game.
Yeah, one of them's the captain, right? So it's really tough. Really interesting conversation, one that I'd be very interested in what your thoughts are. So please do comment below and let us know what you would do with these two. Get at us on Twitter, come and join us on Patreon, join us in the Discord. We'll let this discussion run, because I think it is one of the most interesting ones going into next season. We'll collate what everyone thinks, and we'll definitely chat about it in a future podcast, kind of get a sense of where the fan base is at, and come back to it and come back to the other players. If you want to hear us talk about the individuals from the Leicester match, and probably go on and talk about this a little bit more with Darcy, then come and join us on Extra Time. We do a whole extra show, that basically the West Ham Breakdown 2, over there, and we'll be going on to record that literally right now. I'm not sure Cal's going to be joining us because I think Cal's got to go back to work.
Yeah, sadly.
So it'll be myself, Charlie, and Darcy. And join us on the preview, because the preview was really good this week, and I think we well anticipated a lot of the issues that we could potentially face in the game, and how to handle it, and really nice to kind of get it spot on, and not something that we thought would be particularly easy under Graham Potter with the amount of changes that he's happy making. So yeah, thank you for listening. Look forward to hearing what you all think, and we will catch you next week on the breakdown, probably one day later than usual, because we got another Monday night game. They love it. They're just always on Monday night. See you then.